strike at Salinas, California. Vegetable trucks guarded against strikers. Obstacles across the highway. And don't fall off or you'll make it run over. Yes, we also cried from tear gas. Now the prevailing weapon in labor troubles.
A group of 24 business owners, labor contractors, and recruiters in South Georgia have been named in a federal indictment alleging that they participated in a years-long human trafficking ring that investigators equated to modern-day slavery.
The possible hoarding and price manipulation of onions in the Philippines. At the heart of this onion cartel is
rural South Georgia. Workers are harvesting the state's iconic Vidalia onions. But many worry a new state law that's tough on illegal immigrants could keep them from coming back.
Less than a mile away from the tourist hotels on the Costa del Sol, many migrants live in abandoned farmhouses with no running water or toilets.
California, food and farm workers are more likely to die from COVID-19 than in any other industry.
Nunca, al menos yo pensé y decía, no va a ser así. Y pues llegó un momento de que sí estuvo feo.
But while other industries shut down, the business of agriculture kept going, relying on a mostly undocumented workforce that the federal government called essential.
Pues el producto está y hay que irlo sacando porque tampoco se puede perder y tenemos que hacerla por mantener bien a la familia.
California's vaccination effort against COVID-19 got underway.
Advocates for farm workers say they should be next in line for vaccines as a matter of national food security.
Back in January, Riverside County began the first large-scale effort to vaccinate farm workers. But the challenges they've faced in doing so reveal just how marginalized this community has become.
Vaccinating illegal migrants over the American people.
Hey guys, welcome back to my YouTube True Crime YouTube video. Today I want to do the topic of the asparagus, broccoli, broccolini, onion, lettuce, and cabbage salad farming industry files, etc. Capitalism, slavery, human trafficking, wage theft, lawsuits, etc. So let's get started in this video, but before we get started, all my YouTube videos related to this topic will be on the screen right now, as well if I have room in the description, but if I don't have room in the description, it'll be on the screen right now if you'd like to check those videos out. So let's get started into this YouTube video topic for today. A years-long human trafficking operation called Operation Blooming Onion, the Department of Justice discovered that over 500 H-2A smuggled from Mexico and Central America onion farm workers in Georgia had been coerced into forced capitalism slavery labor. The conditions of the worker camp were horrific. 2 farm workers died, another was allegedly repeatedly raped, and the perpetrators of these crimes regularly abused workers on a daily basis and their families. When not out in the fields working, workers were detained in work camps, concentration-like camps, surrounded by electric fencing or held in cramped living conditions and quarters, including dirty traders with raw sewage leaks. There was little to no access to food or safe drinking water. According to the public indictment, laborers were charged unlawful fees for transportation, food, and housing. And although they were proactively hired for agricultural work, some migrants were illegally used in lawn care, construction, and repair tasks to prevent escapes. Members of the accused crime ring unlawfully confiscated workers' passports and documents. Conspirators always sold and traded workers among themselves like slave owners. Per the indictment, the enslaving employers made over $200 million through this criminal enterprise, but it was finally ended after the investigation, and in 2022, the ringleader of these horrible crimes was sentenced to 30 years in federal prison. Cartels exploit farmers, the rural onion industry in the Philippines. In Manila, Philippines, cartels can hoard onions and manipulate prices by taking advantage of farmers who grow them and forcing them to give up their produce at lower prices, either by claiming that the import onions are cheaper or by artificially filling up cold storage facilities. Quimbo explained that since onion farmers would need cold storage to keep harvested onions fresh, traders who are convinced convincing cold storage operators would falsely claim that the slots are already filled up. Traders would then urge farmers to sell their produce at lower farm gate prices, as it would be better to earn from the onions than to leave them spoiled due to the lack of cold storage rooms. First, they target the local farmers. They would buy very low farm gate prices in two ways. First, they would use the storage in the cold storage unit as an excuse because farmers do not have their own cold storage units. They will say, "Sell us your produce at P12 per kilogram or else it will rot and go bad. You do not have any cold storage place to store your harvest." Small farmers have no choice. That's why they are forced to sell it at a lower price. But the truth is, the cold storages are not full, but since cartels own these facilities, they can say they have total capacity when farmers ask for availability. The lawmaker also said there are cases where the storage facilities are already reserving spaces for the other big cold storage, ensure that farmers cannot deposit their onions anywhere, with the traders or the cartel having control over a huge supply of onions. Prices would raise sharply under the law of supply and demand, aka capitalism. The cartels can make onion deliveries using their truck companies, selling those for higher prices despite obtaining them at lower cost. When many of the imports are obtained by cartels, they also use this as a bargaining leverage against local suppliers. And because cold storage units are full and have a network of retail outlets, they will use their own trucks to deliver stocks whenever they want and wherever they want, which the store they'll sell to at what prices they dictate. Some workers who pick and pack broccolini in Australia and Victoria say they have been exploited and want consumers to send a message by boycotting the vegetable. Australian shoppers are being asked not to buy broccolini from major supermarkets and suppliers to send a message that exploitation of workers within the supply chain of the vegetable needs to be stopped. United Workers Union is behind a push for the boycott, alleging exploitation at what it understands to be the largest broccolini grower in Australia, Viserati Farms, VBA Farming. The people who pick and pack it Perfection fresh broccolini, particularly on one of their farms in Victoria, have an ongoing issues with wage theft, exploitation, mistreatment, and a whole other host of issues. United Workers Union Farm Industry Director Jeanette Armstrong said, "Billion-dollar California salad company exploits undocumented migrants, says workers and Teamsters. Taylor Farms, the world's largest supplier of healthy, wholesome cut vegetables and salads, denies claims it threatened to call immigration officials to keep workers on temporary status, exposing them to dangerous working conditions. Here, Taylor Farms, the world's largest supplier of cut vegetables and salad, packaged produce, which ends up at Safeway, Walmart, Costco, as well as McDonald's, Chipotle, Subway, and Starbucks, etc. If you complain, they will threaten to call La Migra," said Rosie Guadalupe, a former supervisor, using a Latino term for immigration and customs enforcement, a Department of Homeland Security agency also known as ICE. "If you don't have papers, that scares you." A half-dozen current and former workers interviewed by The Guardian alleged the company took advantage of undocumented migrants from Mexico and Central America to keep workers on temporary status year after year, leaving them vulnerable to low pay, dangerous working conditions, imitation, and summary firing, bluffs or not. They stifled complaints over injuries related to cold temperatures, heavy loads, slippery floors, and fast-moving equipment, said the current and former workers. Farm workers face a life and death commute to Arizona's lettuce fields. Each winter, the fields of Yuma, Arizona grow 500 million heads of iceberg lettuce. Every winter, as farms in the northern United States go dormant, Arizona's agricultural season comes back to life. Yuma County, known as the nation's winter salad bowl, produces broccoli and 90% of the leafy greens consumed during the colder months in the U.S. every winter. From November until late April, between 8,000 and 2,000 people, according to an estimate, cross the border daily, spending 7 hours or more traveling from their homes in Mexico to work in Yema's fields. Some are foreign guests, according to workers who come on special visas. Others have green cards or dual citizenship but choose to live in Mexico, whether it's because it's cheaper or because they have family with mixed immigration status. These commuters make up around a quarter of the estimated 38,000 farm workers who shoulder Yuma, Arizona's county's $3 billion agricultural industry. Last year, the pandemic in 2020 turned an already difficult commute into a hazardous and potentially deadly endeavor. Despite the infinite risk, there has been no serious attempt to monitor the toll of the coronavirus has taken on the farm worker population. Arizona does not track cases among farm workers, and testing in Mexico is severely limited. But what we do know is troubling. Over the past year, outbreaks of COVID-19 have closely followed the harvest of labor-intensive crops, meaning anything that must be picked by hand. Yuma itself has been hit hard. In mid-January, Arizona had the highest rate of COVID-19 infections in the world, and Yuma County had some of the worst outbreaks in the state. Even as infections have been running rampant and trending down since the start of the year, the county currently has the highest number of cases per capita. Its only hospital has been overwhelmed, and at times we're running out of ICU beds. Like many others in line this morning, Manuel, who is in his late 20s, is headed to work in the lettuce fields. This isn't his real name. His name has been protected, his identity, because he can lose his job while talking to reporters. Each day, Manuel wakes up at midnight after 4 hours of rest and sleep and slips out the door of a small apartment with an empty stomach. He takes a taxi to the border. At that hour, there are no public buses and walking is too dangerous, and arrives at the line by 1 a.m., which gives him a good shot of making it across in time to catch the bus to the fields. Group transportation has emerged as a potent vector in COVID-19 infection, yet the safeguards provided by employers varies widely. Most buses have limited number of passengers to give each worker his or her own seat. Some have hung plastic sheets between rows. Some drivers enforce the use of face masks, others do not. Without oversight from state and county officials, the level of protection depends on the company. Manuel, like many other workers in line, says he isn't too concerned about getting the virus. I'm worried that my parents will catch it, he says, but we're just taking care of ourselves. Still, the risks from the virus are real, and all farm workers must weigh them against the prospect of losing their jobs and not being able to make rent or buy groceries for themselves. It's a lose-lose situation and choice forced on them by the failure of the United States to develop a humane and realistic immigration policy, one that acknowledges the essential role of its valuable workforce plays in keeping our food prices low and our grocery store well-stocked. For guest workers like Manuel, whose visas are tied to their jobs, the stakes are even higher. If he loses his job, he will likely lose his visa and possibly his next opportunity to get one next season. No matter how you're doing, you have a headache, your back or legs ache or hurt, you still have to get up and work, he says. Semi-slavery on the sweating fields in southern Spain. Lettuces and vegetables grown under semi-slavery conditions in Spain are filling the supermarket shelves in the UK and in Britain. Workers are routinely abused, underpaid, sprayed with toxic pesticides, and sacked if they dare complain or become whistleblowers. An ecologist investigation has found, organic or not, the truth is that a lot of these salad products found in British supermarkets come from the fields of southern Spain, where migrant workers work from dusk till dawn in appalling working conditions, which they describe as capitalism slavery. Despite the existence of strict regulations for companies which pick for the UK supermarkets, on the ground, watch tractors spray lettuce on crops with pesticides in the fields, while groups of workers hurry to pack lettuce as quickly as they can with no protective gear or equipment at all. and at very most a flimsy scarf wrapped around the face at best. Another worker they spoke to, Muhammad, was hospitalized after he alleges suffering from pesticide poisoning in the fields 2 days after we interviewed him. Muhammad was fired that same week after he complained. Workers we spoke to allege that they are paid by the box instead of by the hour, and earning a fixed sum, as it is indicated by in their contract. This makes the payment illegal and forces them to work extra hours with no rest for months to be able to cope with demand and pick as much as they can to make ends meet. The ecologist viewed one such contract and the contracting calculations of Muhammad alongside it. We work on Sundays and sometimes 17, 16, 15 hours, and we don't get paid for the same extra hours we do, says Muhammad. We get paid around €3 an hour, and every month there is money missing. Imperial Valley lettuce, California strike of 1930s. On January 1st, 1930, the Imperial Valley lettuce strike began. Magnitudes of Mexican and Filipino lettuce workers and pickers walked off the job, protesting declining wages and horrible working conditions. Roughly 5,000 workers would simultaneously walk off their jobs and go on strike. The strike ended after only 3 weeks of protests by the lettuce pickers. None of the demands were met, and they were forced to go back to work in horrible working conditions, in capitalism misery, or risk deportation by the aid society who had turned against them in the strike. Fainting and freezing in the farming fields. Alleged labor trafficking victim tells of mistreatment in Wisconsin, Georgia. In 2016, Roberto legally came to the United States for some same reasons that immigrants do, to earn a living and a slice of the American dream pie. But Roberto, a native of southern Mexico, said he suffered a nightmare of coercion, financial exploitation, threats, and mistreatment while working on the Georgia farm and later at cabbage patches in southeastern Wisconsin. When Roberto arrived in Georgia, the situation was not all what the recruiter had described. There were hundreds of workers, all men, all from Mexico, living together in cramped barracks and isolated from nearby towns. He said, according to the court documents, that Garcias conspired to force the men to work through threats of serious bodily harm, and workers' ability to travel was limited by the confiscations of their passports. The men told federal investigators that Garcias yelled at them to work faster and sometimes refused medical help when they were sick. The bosses charged them money to get rides to the doctor. When it was hot, some men passed out in the fields, and Garcia would not let the fellow workers move them into the shade. Investigations were told the men, if they felt ill from the heat or fainted, the Garcias yelled at them. They could not keep up. They were told to sit on a bus without pay. Sometimes the manager was angry and didn't give us water, Roberto said. We told him there was no water, and it seemed intentional. The men at Garcia's charged them between $100 and $150 to ride to the hospital. A doctor advised one worker he should take a week off, which prompted the Garcias to threaten to send them back to Georgia, court records say. Roberto, the workers hardly ate and lost weight. The men said they were not fully confiscated for the time they had worked. Several men told investigators that taxes had been taken out of each paycheck, and some said their last few weeks were totally unpaid. Payments that were found to be improperly withheld, and all federal agents reported that the Garcias failed to pay the workers $850,000 in 2015 and 2016. Business of asparagus. Systematic exploitation of harvest workers in Europe, whether boiled, steamed, or grilled, or chopped up and used in risotto rice, soup, or salad. Asparagus has become one of our favorite vegetable treats. One person's culinary delight and cooking delight, however, is another's abject capitalism suffering. The asparagus harvest starts in April every year. It also marks the beginning of an ordeal for the hundreds of thousands of harvest workers who make their way to Austria and Germany from Poland, Romania, Moldova, and Bosnia and Bulgaria. Not all of them are coming of their own free will. Reports describe people being trafficked, conditions similar to capitalism slavery, and systematic exploitation. If you're not looking for abuses in the harvesting sector in Austria, it won't take you long to find them. The Marchfield asparagus scandal made huge waves in Lower Austria in 2020. For example, the media interest and public outcry were fittingly huge when it came to the asparagus company in Madorf and der Donner, who was responsible for systematically exploiting harvest workers. Workers there had to do piecework every day for up to 15 hours a day for an hourly rate of only €4. They were housed in unhygienic mass accommodation unfit for human habitation. The company was eventually closed by the authorities for a short period of time. Migrants accused asparagus farm, 43 workers charged bad treatment in Maryland, and in another true crime case, the recent conviction of 3 men in the Czech Republic for people trafficking offenses shone a light on the hidden exploitation and violence endured by farm workers cultivating asparagus for European dinners. The workers described being forced to toil for long hours at a time harvesting asparagus plants, and they were accusing the people of being beaten and threatening with guns, knives, and swords by the gang. Asparagus farmer faces fines for paying pickers 55 cents a kilo in another true crime case.